And of course, welcome to another great episode of the Chey and Pav show. And not that I wanted to spoil it right from the beginning, but it will be great. I know Pav likes to tell me you can't say this right away because what if it's not? But I assure you, this one is and is going to be great. We have Salima with us today to talk all things education. And I think this, Pav, I know you and I could probably articulate that we're excited about this conversation, not because we're just performatively excited. We're excited because Salima, I think, is our first guest who we've actually met in person. And so this is how I know this conversation going to be exceptional. All our other guests, great guests, but we've never had a personal interaction. So Salima, welcome to the show. Don't have me talk anymore. You can see Pav's already eye rolling me. Please share a little bit about who you are, what you're seeing in the educational space, and where you see yourself in sort of the vastness of education, of what you want to do. What are your pillars? What are your foundations? And where do you think you can have that impact and how your journey has brought you there? And looking forward to your first response.
Great. I didn't know I was your first guest that you'd met in person. And I think we actually met last year at the Japanese Canadian Cultural Center. No, we met at One Civic.
Oh, I met you. Yes,
Yes.
Salima, I
Yeah,
met
Pav and
you,
I met at
and
One
we.
Civic, and then Chey and I
Yeah,
met at the Japanese Canadian Cultural Center.
that's right.
That's
And
right.
That's right.
If you've met
We
Pav,
bumped into
you've
each
met
other.
us both. As I always say, I am the consequence. I am always the consequence of being friends with Pav. So that's assumed. Yes, we met at Civic.
but I actually remember the excitement of it,
Yeah,
and just that you're real. You're
yeah.
real
I
people.
know.
Yeah.
I know. I think
And we
we
have a
bumped
photo
into each
op.
other.
Yes, and we have a
Hmm.
photo op. That is the proof.
Yes, we do.
Yes.
Yes, we do.
Yes. Anyway, thank you both for having me. Maybe I'll just start with a little bit of my journey in education and kind of situate myself. And I always like to say that I'm the product of Indigenous and Black feminist thought and action leaders in education. And I'm also the product of many, many generations of very strong women in my family who have been formal and informal educators as well. Um, so I actually did when I was at the age where I was thinking about what I wanted to do when I grew up. Uh, my father always said to me, "I think you should be a teacher," and I remember my words were something to the effect of, "I don't think so. I wanted to be a lawyer. I wanted to be a journalist. I wanted to be a backup dancer for Janet Jackson. I wanted to be a DJ." And then when I went to university, I ended up tutoring a lot of Afghan refugees. I was living in Montreal at the time, and I loved it. I loved it. I went on to do my post baccalaureate diploma in learning disabilities, in teaching students with learning disabilities, and I started teaching in Vancouver in what would have been considered. They used to call it inner city. We call it underserved communities. And then I ended up moving to Toronto and started teaching in the Jane Finch community at Gosford Elementary School. And I always say Jane Finch raised me to be the best educator that I could be. And interestingly enough, I actually started in secondary and fell into elementary and have never looked back. Um, I've done central work, so between the Toronto District School Board and the now defunct Literacy and Numeracy Secretariat, which was attached to the Ministry of Education. I was seconded to teach in the Faculty of Education at York University for 4 years. I came back as a vice principal, then became a principal, and have just left a role as centrally assigned principal for, this is a very long title, Equity, Anti-Racism, and Anti-Oppression, and Teachers Learning and Leading. And I am in a school again as a school-based principal. And I'm also a mother of two fabulous kids. So the teaching, the education is reciprocal because they teach me every single day how to be better. So that's where I started. Um, and what do I see happening? Um, I think, I've always positioned myself, and I've been positioned by others as an anti-racist leader. I am outspoken. I am an interrupter or a disruptor, and I'm pretty proud of it. I'm actually wearing my T-shirt that I think says "Strong Female Lead," which my a previous secretary had given to me. I don't know if that's a compliment or not. I'll take it as a compliment. But I think one of the things that I'm hoping that we can talk about is in this work of interruption and in this work of trying to do transformative leadership, how we don't lose ourself in the mix and how we don't lose our spirit in the mix. So I'm hoping that our conversation can start to go there.
I think, Salima, yes, we mentioned already, we've met a few times. We've met in different circumstances. We came across each other first, I believe, online.
Mm-hmm.
And we started communicating in that online world a couple of years ago. And we've seen the work that you have done. We've seen the incredible work that you have done firsthand. We've been in professional development with you, leading the PDs for us, and we've learned a lot from you and a lot from the work that you have done. And I think that what interested us in the last couple of months, and myself, I think more so, is that work of taking care of ourselves or not losing ourselves in the work of transformative education, as you mentioned. Because I feel like this, and it's not that it's been a buzzword, I feel like it's finally being brought to light, like these feelings, this heaviness. And how do we define it? What does it mean? Why are we feeling this way? And what can we do to bring more light to it and help us continue to do that work while also being our best selves or being in a place where we can do this work optimally. And so I think that I love this conversation. I love that you are bringing this to us as well. So can you share a little bit of this work with us and what it means to take care of ourselves, to rest, to be our best selves while doing this transformative educational work?
Mm-hmm. It has something that I had to consciously do was really sit down with myself and say, um, do you feel good? Do you feel happy? Do you feel like you are doing the work in a way that centers human rights principles, that centers love, that centers collective care, that centers hope? And around January, February of this year, I I had really tough conversations with myself, and it didn't feel good. I felt like I was going to work every single day, but I wasn't able to bring me, Salima, in her whole self. I felt like I was doing what others expected of me. You know, Chey used the word performative before. It felt performative. And I don't perform. I or at least I don't perform consciously is what I should say. So if I'm going to do the work, I'm going to do it because it's anchored in theory and practice. I'm going to do it because it's rooted in what communities are saying. It's what multiple voices within communities are saying, not the loudest, not the ones that hold the most power. And so I realized that I this happiness that I'd always had in whatever role I'd had in education wasn't there. And it was actually impacting home, it was impacting work. And so for me, I needed to remove myself. And it took a lot of courage, it took a lot of me being able to say, if if me being in this particular space as an anti-racist leader is not is actually harming rather than furthering any kind of transformative practice, then I'm going to remove myself, because if I am going to look after others, but I'm not looking after me, I'm not looking after my spirit and my soul and my heart and my mind, then I can't do the work effectively. Um, I started off by saying that I'm rooted in a lot of Indigenous and Black feminist thought, and bell hooks actually is always one of my go-tos. And she talks about labor for freedom, and she talks about being able to collectively imagine what's possible. And when it feels stifling, when it feels like um, literally like you can't breathe, um, then for me, I had to go into myself to be able to nurture my imagination and be able to nurture hope. Maria Makaba, who's an incredible abolitionist from the United States, talks about hope being a discipline. So I needed to take time to nurture that hope and feel hopeful again. And so I went on a leave for the first time in my life. I went on a mental health leave, and I needed to remove myself from, the formal piece of education, because education doesn't just happen in schools and it doesn't just happen in institutions. It happens within community and it happens within family. And that's what I did. I went back to family and I went back to community, to that notion of collective care and reciprocal care. And I practiced being free, that practice of freedom that Bell Hooks talks about. Now, I know it was a privilege for me to be able to do that. Not everybody is able to do that, so I do recognize that. But that's what I needed to do, and I really had to think about how my physical body, my mind, my emotions, my spirits, were all interconnected. Even what I was eating or not eating, um, actually getting up and walking around and not being, as we're on a computer right now, but not being stuck on a computer for an entire day, or being stuck on the phone because everybody needs you in that moment at that time.
Mm-hmm.
I set boundaries. And so
Mm-hmm.
now it's, how do I maintain those boundaries now that I'm back in a formal role in education, and keeping all of that nurturing spirit and learning with me as I continue to move forward? Because, as we're sitting here on October 22nd, 2023, the world is violent around us. There's a crisis happening around us. Um, so if we're going to look at transformative change and practice, we also have to start with ourselves. And what does that
Mm-hmm.
mean? And make sure that we're being true to our principles, and not getting swayed into this screaming, angry void, because it can be very easy to go there and then lose ourselves in the process. I don't know if I answered your question. I don't know if I
Yeah.
went off in 5 tangents there.
No, you did, and you've provided me with a little additional food for thought, and it's something that I think I've been grappling with for some time, and I don't know, Che, if you've also felt the same way. When we interrogate ourselves, I think it's very good for us and how we disrupt ourselves within the system. Do you feel like when we disrupt ourselves and interrogate ourselves and take care of ourselves to do our best work, that we're able to then go and disrupt the system? Because what I'm hearing, and maybe I'm wrong, you removed yourself from the system to be able to do your best work, but we want to be able to progress the system eventually.
Mhm.
Um, can the progress we make within ourselves also help us to move the system along as well? And maybe this is a question that we can't answer in this conversation, but I'd love to hear your insight, or if you've thought about it in any kind of way as well. And it's something, I know it's a little bit more personal for myself. Like, I do a lot of work on myself, but how am I using that to make progress collectively.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if that even makes any sense.
You know what? It does, because I think I've been, or there's a tendency to just move through life in anger. And especially in education, we've seen for too long, decades. I mean, the work of anti-racist leadership is not new. Um, so there's a collective anger, and that anger is needed, right? It propels movements, it fosters movements, it mobilizes people. But I think what comes out of that anger then is this movement to action, and how we hold compassion for each other, and we're able to engage in a conversation. How we move from, a friend of mine calls it the egos and icons mentality. There's one way to do this work, and this is the only way to do this work. And if you don't do it this way, then you're doing it wrong. And we're shutting people down, and we're canceling people. And that's not to take away from violations of human rights, but also, how do we hold each other in a space of grace? And that was something that I needed to work on. I needed to hold grace for myself to be able to hold grace for others. So then as I come back into a formal system, my immediate instinct is not to break a relationship, whether it's a conversation with a colleague, or it's a conversation with somebody else in education, but to hold compassion and hold grace and have patience. The system has underserved so many communities, in interconnected ways as well, for so long, and the pace always feels too slow, because students and similar communities of students are continually shut out of school. They're silenced. Stories that start with genocide as opposed to beauty and brilliance. But we have to hold compassion for each other as adults. So that's what I'm trying to hold into. So back to Mariana Makaba's famous quote: "Hope is a discipline." Right? That hope, and that hope is situated in collective care. And I always say, if people haven't read Bell Hook's book, All About Love, we have to have love for ourselves in order to do this work. And when I think about, the seven grandfather teachings, or grandmother teachings, or in whatever way it's being presented and positioned, love is spoken about there. And when we talk about culturally relevant and responsive pedagogy, Gloria Ladson-Billings talks about love, right? And love is also justice. So it's all of these things intertwined. It's an action, and it's remembering that none of us are experts. We have expertise in different ways, but we're not experts. And I think that's been part of the problem as well, is we sort of hold these people as the holders of all knowledge. And I know that I've fallen into that trap as well. But we have to learn together to bring ourselves up together, to make ourselves better together.
Chey, I'm going to let you speak, but I love the way that you said that hope is a discipline. We have to provide that space for one another. I almost feel like we have to be in it, and then we have to take a step back and do a little bit of self work,
Mm-hmm.
and then come back in it,
Mm-hmm.
and then come back to it, and then bring our learning of ourselves, and that learning of love. I think that is the root of everything, and then come back to the work as well. So I appreciate that answer and that follow up, as well. And Chey, I know you're itching to add something here, and continue the conversation. I didn't mean to ice you out, but I was really into this response from Salima. So thank you.
I'm so glad you said that with a straight face, because you absolutely meant to just ice me out early on. I think you actually removed me from the chat about 3 minutes in, and then I just coded my way back into this conversation. But the conversation has been great, and maybe I'm just consuming and observing the first 20 minutes, but it's been fantastic conversation. There's so many things that I'm thinking. I love that idea of discipline with hope. And I made the connection not to center my story, but I thought of my journey into central coaching for a little bit, where I think I went in with a naive hope or what I thought that space would become. And I felt, and that's not to say that the space was that, the space wasn't what I had sort of envisioned when I went in, and I sort of lost some of that hope. And so I became a little disgruntled with where I was and the impacts I was making. And so, when we had this conversation of rejuvenating ourselves, I feel rejuvenated going back into the classroom. Not that everyone has to have that journey, but I got lost in that space, and I lost hope because I didn't know what I was doing. Not in the technical sense, I knew what I was doing, but I lost that spiritual sense of what is it that I'm doing here. I can't measure my impact. I'm getting engaged in lots of, we talked about that, performative conversations, and I'm not to say other people were performative. I guess I got caught in performative conversation, not for me to gaslight anyone, and that disrupt yourself mentality. I'm just thinking of what I get out of that space. And so it was back to the classroom has been my rejuvenation. And it makes me think about what are the things that people are doing to rejuvenate? Because as you both were having that great conversation, I think we get really simple things of what people need to do to, I guess the system puts, just take time for yourself on the weekend. And it's almost the system putting it back on you to rejuvenate yourself. Because I don't remember whose tweet it was, but there was a tweet about if you need your weekends to freshen up, then maybe your job is too taxing on you and your system's getting a pass on finding ways to alleviate the tensions on staff. I mean, I could give one anecdotal observation when you think about system, how we use our system. Do we use our system to stretch teachers out to the max, or do we use our system to try to alleviate stuff from their plate? And as a teacher, you know what? I love teaching, but I know it's exhausting. And sometimes I look at schedules and I look at the way the system's built up, and I said, this schedule's used to stretch me out as far as humanly possible. And the sense that we're ingraining a space for me to stay fresh or to reflect on my practice just isn't in the space, just isn't in the system. At least that's my perception. It's not to say it's not there, just that's how it lands on me. And so as you were having that great conversation, I was thinking a few things. When you think about rest as resilience, what does rest look like? What onus should we have on our system to provide spaces of rest? Because as much as we have the pedagogy and we know it works and we know it has a place, does our system really value it? And if our system doesn't, often our system will say what we value, but then it doesn't take the time, put the resources in to do it. I mean, I could even think about high school applications, and you say we're changing all these simple rules to make high schools more accessible for everyone, but I'll just take an art specialty school. There isn't one in Rexdale, so making it a free choice to just go there, those aren't the obstacles. I can tell you as a grade 8 teacher, the obstacles isn't that students couldn't make the application there. It's that it's an hour and a half commute and seven different TTC rides. But the simple solution is just to say, oh, everyone can go if you feel like going. Yes, there's a place for that. But the real solution is actually building an art school in Rexdale so students can get there in 10 minutes. But that takes a lot of money, and that's a lot of system change. So that's not coming. And so thanks for giving me my 3 minutes. Salima, the question actually is when you think about rest as resilience, one, what are you doing for that rest? What are you doing for it? Because it can look many different ways. And then what onus or what responsibilities do our systems have to honor it and create space for it beyond just on your weekends?
Now I'm thinking about an art school being built in Rexdale, and I'm like, how do we make that happen?
It's needed.
It's needed. So I'm actually going to take your words, Chey, and I'm actually going to position it as rest as resistance. So Tricia Hersey talks about rest as resistance. And so being able to say, my body is a site of free labor is not something that you're going to get to use anymore. So I can continue to do this work, but I can't do it alone. So how are you supporting me, and how are you doing it with me? So how are we getting down and dirty in a clean sense when we are doing this work of education? So I'm going to give it feels like a small example, but I'm thinking about the hope that can come from this. So tomorrow, the school that I'm a principal at, we are all K-5 going to a farm, and we are going to pick apples and look at pumpkins and play with chickens. And that's going to be our curriculum for the day. And so when we talk about what does it mean for self-care. It's an opportunity for adults and students to be outside, breathe some fresh air, touch things that are growing from the soil, and our curriculum is going to grow from that. And what could it turn into? What could it turn into? It could it could turn into a conversation on food insecurity. It could talk about, Afro-Indigenous ways of growing, foods and reclaiming the land. We could talk about, who has access to natural resources, fresh, clean resources, and who doesn't. That's anti-racist pedagogy right there. And there's curriculum to back that all up. But we're going out of the classroom because we can get really mired in the walls of a building. So that's one small way that 200 of us are kind of breaking open that traditional way of teaching and learning, and creating spaces for each other that feel hopeful. Now, yes, that takes budget. So, we've had to think about allocation of resources, and it's taken time to organize, but the tools are there. So I'm going to say the tools are there, but it's how we have to create and think differently, that imagination and the possibilities. And that's what I mean about being able to take that time to do things differently. And we keep hearing this, right? The pandemic has taught us that we cannot do education the same way. But we're actually still doing education the same way in a lot of ways, right? Our frameworks haven't necessarily changed that much. The demands on educators, in fact, have increased. The demands on families have increased. So we have to imagine new possibilities, a new futurity, I think, for education. So, that art school in Rexdale actually becomes something. And whether it's we're forging new community partnerships with local artists that work in the community of Rexdale, and working with families to have that happen in school, or to take students out of the building and take them to community, because education is reciprocal. Maybe that's what it is too. But I think we have to collectively imagine different possibilities. There's a conference coming up. I would say a mentor and friend of mine, Tanitia Monroe, who works with the research department at Toronto District School Board and the Centre of Excellence for Black Student Achievement, has organized a conference at York University that's coming up. So I'm doing a little bit of a plug right now, but it's hearing from voices of Black identifying youth who are saying let's think differently about what we can do together. We talk about student voice. I know the two of you are leaders in engaging student voice. And so it's another opportunity to hear from young people about what's needed, and for us, the adults, to actually listen and then make a change, right? And I think that's what you're talking about, Chey, is where's that change? Because there's a lot of talk. It's a lot of talk from people, but that action is us working on ourselves, and then being able to bring that back into our different collective spaces with a renewed hope.
I think
Yes.
action. Oh, sorry, Pav. I was going to say that action piece, I think, is of what Pav and I have learned a lot in our journey, is the performance, whether willingly or unwilling, to think that the work they're doing is actually action, or if it's just theory. And I think one thing that we have found is that action for a lot of folks, and not that this isn't part of the action scenario, just is the conversation. But as classroom teachers, conversation is a piece, but it's not the only piece. And often when you talk about conversations, it's the conversation in the classroom, for example. But I would always say you've got 4 people engaged in that conversation. Most people become consumers. Most people disengage, and we allow the same 4 or 5 voices all the time to manifest. And as a teacher, very early on, I actually had a coach come in, and one thing we chose to is I asked him to do a tally chart of who I was interacting with to engage conversation. And it was eye-opening. I did pretty well, but I also saw that I was, tapping into 10 different students more often than other ones. And it shifted. And then when I go back to my central and those spaces, I said, in the teacher space, in the leadership space, I then see the same thing, is that I see a lot of, we're going to do action, and it's going to start with a conversation. I'm like, and because the conversation is very limiting. And then I often find that so many of the examples of actions, and we have a conversation, and my always thought is, and what else? Because the conversation is really beneficial for 3, and it's probably alienating for 10. And so conversation is one piece of my multiple choice board, or part of my continuum to action. So I love the fixation on action, because where do I sort of position myself? I don't position myself or gift myself the category of a disruptor. I sort of think as a white male, I don't get to call myself a disruptor. So when I think of a disruptor, I always think I don't have the receipts to dare make that claim. When I think of where am I doing the work, where do I think I have benefit? I think I provide real world examples for what a classroom teacher can do to instill in their classroom. Not because I'm doing it great, but because I'm using multiple different spaces to amplify voice. And then when you talk about positionality at the beginning, yes, I'm a white male, but I'm a white male teaching in a racialized community for 22 years. And so I've had my failures, I've had my successes. I can see where voices have been amplified, and I've sort of gone around the journey. And I always think that example is a worthy example in the space of anti-racism. What does the white male teacher do in a racialized community? Because that dynamic is always different. And so I always think for me, it's about decentering myself as much as I can, because I am the strong voice, no matter what, whether speaking or not. So that's my randomness as you talk, because it's all about action. And then it's those action steps, because you provided real action steps or thoughts that can initiate how we could bring the arts and amplify the arts in the Rexdale community, rather than saying you need to leave Rexdale in order to be an artist. And one could argue that in our high school model of going away to all these different schools, we're trying to elevate community, not say you need to leave community. So I've always been a big proponent of our local feeder schools. Those are the schools you should be going to, because this is your community and you want to elevate your community. So thanks for those action steps. Pav, you're going to have to remind me on Monday morning to start putting those into place.
Thanks, Chey. No, you always provide a lot of value. And I know you and I have definitely had that conversation about action and what that looks like. And I think it's hard for a lot of teachers, describe what that actually looks like, because perhaps for a lot of teachers, they haven't put the 2 and 2 together, that the things that they are trying in their spaces are action pieces in order to get that representation for the students, or bringing in different kinds of books. And it does go beyond just talking about the issues. It's what am I doing for the students in order to hear every voice and make sure that every student is being seen. So I think that is a valuable piece. And I'm thinking, Salima, there's probably a lot there that maybe you want to respond to, and I'll give you an opportunity to do that as well. In your introduction, you talked about informal education and the impact of informal education on you growing up. And when you speak about this excursion that the school is going on, that was the connection that I made. These are the pieces of informal. I mean, it's in a formal setting. You're doing it with your formal institution, but you're learning in a way that is not the formal way that we would learn every single day. And I'm thinking these are the experiences that students are going to remember. The conversations that happen in these spaces, whether you are talking about connections to the land, or whether you are talking about food insecurity, those conversations are going to stick and probably have a higher tendency of leading to some sort of action afterwards than reading about it from a book, or even watching a YouTube video about it. That firsthand experience is really what is going to lead to that impactful learning, which is what we want to be seeing in the classroom space. And I do want to talk about the next question that we have as well. But I know that we've just discussed a lot of things here, and I want to give you an opportunity to maybe reflect on any of it, or respond to anything, or to add anything before we go on to kind of change the topic a little bit.
Yeah, I guess I think this idea of action on the ground is what brought me back to a school, because I think we do get very caught up in theory and practice, or theory and then trying to implement it into practice. But for me, my personal experience is to really be able to co-facilitate that where it matters most, which is with students, with families, with communities. And so, as I reflect on what we're talking about, I know that's what drives me. I can't do the work from afar, and I felt like some of my other roles, I was too removed from what was actually happening, in actual time. So it's, I guess even my trajectory, I've been in schools, and then I've come out, and then I've come back into schools, and I've come out, and I think that's really served me well in my journey, because I'm dipping in and out. And I think it also, again, speaks to that imaginative, creative possibility that we can all have as educators, because there's no fixed line, right? Like, there's no fixed line in teaching. It's not X plus Y equals Z. It would be so nice if it was. But, for any educator, we can tell you that any day is going to be different. Any hour is going to be different. Any student is going to be different. And we hopefully are different, right? So, it's getting messy. And so it's finding that joy in getting messy, because there isn't a roadmap. And, we're really co-creating these roadmaps with each other, for each other. And, as I've, learned from both of you, I think that's what the two of you have done so well in so many different ways, with students, with colleagues, in your writing. It's, finding different ways to reach different audiences, and to be able to talk about practice as action. So that's where my brain has gone right now.
Thank you, Salima, and that's very kind of you. I think that Chey and I, we spend a lot of time reflecting, and that reflection is really what, in many cases, and we've heard so many different educators that we've spoken to on the podcast and in other areas as well, is that actual act of sitting back, and I think that that's part of that self-care process, is having an opportunity to sit back and say, okay, here's where I am, here's what we need to do, and so how do we get there? And I think that's key. But that leads me to thinking about, why do I feel so guilty when I do that? Like, why do I? And I don't know if you felt this way at all. I'm sure there was a little bit of that, because I can't imagine taking a step back from work, from myself, to take care of myself. Um, so please speak to that. I know, because it's very multifaceted,
Mhm.
where this feeling of guilt comes from, and why it's so profound in education. So if you want to either speak from your own personal experience, or even your professional learning in this area, please tell us a little bit about what that feels like.
Absolutely. Guilt. Oh my goodness. I love my family, but I was raised with guilt. Uh, we are products of a capitalist society. So it's, what's the next thing you're going to do? What's the next thing you're going to achieve? What's next, 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 next? And um, I think society as a whole has moved into this checks and balances of, you have X number of degrees, or you have X number of qualifications. And we're really, you know, people can get very caught up in this academic accolade sort of competition, actually. And when we're not producing or we're not doing, it feels like we're not meeting our responsibilities. And I think those can be, imposed by family, imposed by society, imposed by employers. So I felt guilt. I felt guilt about not going to work every single day. But I had to really reframe my thought process, and I worked with other teachers. So teachers who were therapists, teachers who were holistic nutritionists, teachers who were yoga therapists. My kids were my teachers. My family were my teachers, to say, I need to give myself permission to breathe. I need to give myself permission to come back to who I am. And I think in education, to be able to do that and to say no is hard, but it's important. So, we work as public school educators in a publicly funded institution. So yes, there are parameters, there are roles and responsibilities, the Education Act, the Ontario College of Teachers, et cetera, right? So we're bound by those professional responsibilities and obligations. But I think there's also an assumption that our time, our personal resources can be given because it's about the students. And I think that becomes the narrative. Well, it's for the students. And yes, there are so many of us that would want to do whatever we can, but we cannot do it alone. And so when we come back to thinking about how do we make education better, it can't be on an individual. It's a collective responsibility. So this guilt that we hold, I think, really fits into this individualistic notion of capitalism and production. Like, we're not, cogs in a factory. So I don't know if that answers the question, but those are things that I've been thinking about. Again, coming back to that collective care, that reciprocal care. And I don't know that we've had that for each other. We're not holding each other with compassion. Now, in my family, it was, weekends were not for rest. It was cleaning and groceries and cooking, and I'm still doing that. But I also will say, I'm going to lie down for an hour and I'm going to be okay with it, or I'm going to binge watch something on Netflix that's really mindless, because I need that right now. And I think the more we practice it, the better we'll get at it. Like anything else, I guess.
That's right. Otherwise, we find ourselves dissociating in our cars after.
Yeah, exactly. Yes, that's just sitting there because you're not able to interact with another human because you've just given everything of yourself to other people.
That's right.
Salima, when you shared your story, I'm reminded of a principal. Oh, sorry, I'll take that back. Edit that out, Pav. Not a principal, another adult. Early on in my teaching career, that would always preface everything. Remember, we're for the children. And I went on a little mini rant, and I said, if we are setting the bar so low as to think I, as a teacher, need to be reminded that I'm here for kids, we are going nowhere of importance. Because I said, I figured that out when I was doing all my volunteer coaching, when I was working in my community centers, long before I got into teaching. So if you need to convince me that I'm here for the children, we are going nowhere, because I'm up here. I got room to go up. But if you're starting with that, we're here for the kids, we're going nowhere, because you've lost me, because I instantaneously know you know nothing about me or my craft. And I guess maybe I don't know enough about you. So when you said that, I had that flashback to way back when. But I also had a flashback to another great interaction with a principal, choose to edit or not, Pav, where they told me, I was there early in my teaching career, Friday night, 5:30 marking, and he came up and he said, you 100% happy and rested and 80% prepared is far better than the reverse. Go home. And I'm not leaving my room until you get out. He waited a few 10, 15 minutes. I said, okay, but let me finish this. But I remember that. And also, as you were talking, I was thinking about this hustle culture. And then I
Yes.
also, Pat, you and I have had this conversation off the camera because I haven't quite really articulated it. That I find, especially in the social media space as well, there's a little bit of a manipulation, a psychological manipulation on people to do more. And I often wonder who's sending these messages. And I, can't totally articulate it at the moment, but I know I've been really paying a lot of attention to a lot of psychological warfare and a lot of manipulation in the edu space about people delivering certain messages and really being really grayish in where they are. They're not as open to their positionality because their stances put other people at risk, put other people to have to make a stand while they don't need to. And so this is all a big cloud right now. But I was reminded on that when we talk about working hard and this pressure to work on people. It's overtly stated, but I think to underline there's a culture of people, folks. I don't know if that's the right term, Pat. You definitely need to edit that. Underlying with a little bit of manipulation where people feel like, oh, it's not directly pushing them, but there is just an underhand, this manipulation of people insinuating that they're doing this type of work when really they aren't, but they're making you sort of give up to give more. And so that is, Pav will tell you, a useless statement because I named no names. I said something specific, but it's just a feeling I have by what I'm seeing in the overall social media edu space where you can learn so much, but it can also enrage you so much.
Mm-hmm.
But Salima, this has been a wonderful conversation. You can dive in and comment on anything I said. What you're finding out here is this is exactly how I teach. It's random thoughts, and then I hope some student extracts something of wisdom that's able to turn it into something of brilliance. But this conversation I know has been fantastic. You can comment on some sort of final thoughts, but our sort of rollout question is, where can folks find you and what's next for you in this educational space? Because yes, you've laid this foundation of where you've been, and you have been all kinds of different spaces. I would love to have had so many different spaces to get a real perspective, because I just think my 6 months of coaching opened my eyes. I can't even imagine the amount of experience you've had to really know what you see from every perspective. So we want to thank you for gifting us your insights, your I know you don't want to say expertise, but your experiences then. And one, like I said, let our audience know where they can find you and what's next for you.
Oh, what's next? I love that question. Because I always think of it of what's next is I need to make lunch, and what's next is I need to do the laundry. But what's next is also some writing. But before I get to that, I also want to sort of recognize that many of us haven't been given an option to take a break from work, right? So the free labor of Black, Indigenous, racialized females in particular, but not necessarily female identifying folks, has been taken for granted for a really, really, really long time. And so I think there's unlearning that many of us need to do, because people have just been positioned as no opportunity to make a mistake, no opportunity to slow down, because we will receive backlash for that. So there's some definite unlearning as a whole that we need to do for that. And so as I continue my own journey in unpacking that for myself, and working in community to support and be an ally with and for friends and colleagues, I think about boundaries and the collective responsibility that education needs people to have, rather than individuals. So we get away from those egos and icons kind of mentality. I did some writing, and I have a chapter coming out in a book, October 2024. So I don't know if I can say the title and everything of the book yet. So, but I will say it's based on some of my work that I did in my master's thesis, and part of the title is about negotiating fragments, and it's really about how do I lead if I can't lead with all the parts of myself whole. So I was really excited about that coming out. And then I've been thinking about and dreaming about some writing with my cousin, sort of looking into untold stories of our family and our ancestors. And I'd love to make a connection to, recipes and foods that have been silenced or forgotten or taken away, because I want to pay homage to the really, really strong women in my family that I'm a product of. So that's where my brain is on the personal side. And then really just finding a moment to laugh every single day at work with people that I love working with, and creating spaces of joy and belonging that we talk about, but actually making those happen. So that's what's next for now, in addition to making lunch and doing laundry.
Doing the laundry. Those are two things on my list too.
Exactly. Exactly. Oh, and making a new music playlist as well, because that's
that's important. Yes.
Yeah.
I left my AirPods in my classroom, and as Chey knows, I've been complaining about that all weekend. So I have to. It's a life without music this weekend, and it's hard for me. So.
Oh no!
Pav, just look over your shoulder. Look over your shoulder, and you got your record player. I know the side only plays for 18 minutes, but
and all the records that are piled up right there.
Amazing.
No, I know, but then the kids complain about the music choice, and Mom, why is it blasting through the house? So definitely, we definitely appreciate, want to give you the time to get back to your weekend, and we appreciate you spending some time with us on the weekend as well. We're very excited to hear about your writing projects and very excited to hear more about it. And that book, I know a year sounds like a long time away, but it'll come fast. Believe me, there are so many, as Chey and I have learned, so many little pieces that have to come together before that project can be released. But very excited. And if that book that you're writing with your cousin does come to fruition, and we hope it does, I'd love to read that as well, because that's very near and dear to my heart as well. Salima, thank you so much for gifting us your time this weekend and your knowledge, and everything that you have learned along the way on your educational, personal, professional journey. We appreciate all of the time that you've given us, and we appreciate learning and growing with you since we have become connected. So hopefully that is something that can continue as well. So thanks again for joining us on the Chey and Pav Show.
Absolutely. Thank you. This has been a gift for me today. So thank you.
And you're listening to the Chey
and Pav Show.